So we have the February balance patch upon us, guys. I'm BJ the Brave. Welcome back to some more Warpforge content. We're going to be just taking a look at the patch notes and reviewing it, and really trying to take a bit of a deep dive and thinking about like how this might change the meta, what this might mean for the factions involved. So very quickly, let's just look at the introduction. So basically, we're saying that Sylar dominated the meta last season. The Orkz and Astra Militarum are the two factions that are really receiving quite a wide variety of updates, mostly focusing on tweaking their stat lines. This is all due to be out on the 6th of February, which is tomorrow, at the time I'm recording this, on the evening of the 5th. So probably by the time you're watching this, it will be out. Alright, so let's take a look at the changes. The first thing is a tiny nerf to Sylar, essentially, and the Sorcerer, which is that the Infernal Gaze, which is one of the 3 psychic powers, basically only does 1 to 2 damage instead of 1 to 3. To be honest, I was thinking that something like this was good, because that's the one that only costs 1 energy and the others cost 2. And when you high roll and get the 3 damage, it is very good. So 1 to 2, it's like I say, it's a tiny nerf. It also means that if Sylar was using that on the enemy warlord and it was just helping with that beatdown aggro potential, it's potentially 1 point less. It's not huge, but it's a good change, I think, that one. Okay, let's jump in. So next up we have got the Goff Orks. Quite a lot of changes here. So the first thing is the huge chopper, which is Gordrang's talent. It now heals on Slay instead of the how many enemy troops there are. So basically it's going to say +2 melee attack and heal 2. Okay, so let's get the cards up as we go so we can have a look at them, right? So at the minute, every time you spend your 2 energy, it gets the +2. It's still going to get that, and it heals 1 for each enemy troop. So technically, like, I suppose if your opponent only has one troop now, then technically this is a buff, right? Because you're going to kill that troop potentially, and then you're going to get +2 for the heal, whereas before you'd have only got 1 for the heal because there's only 1 troop. Obviously, the downside is against a go wide board, you can't ever get more than the 2 heal. So overall, I think that's okay. I think the problem that you had before is it was really discouraging sort of go wide plays. So yeah, I think overall that's not a bad change. I think it brings this ability a bit more in line with, kind of makes me think is it kind of on par with something like Belial's ability now, something like that. Seems like it's going to be less swingy, basically. Don't know. I think overall, I think it is a slight nerf. Yeah, I think so. All right, next up we've got Gazgul Mag Uruk Thraka. Now does both effects unconditionally, so it's now going to read as deploy a grot and give +1 melee to your troops. Now, I really am interested in this change, and probably the biggest part of the change is if you look at how it currently is worded. It says give +1 to your troops. If you don't control any, then you deploy a grot. So the way it reads now is essentially you could have 5 troops down on the board. If you play this, you will deploy a grot. So you don't, that condition has disappeared of not having anything on your board, and I think that's brilliant. Actually, I think that's quite a nice little buff. I doubt that. I'm kind of curious whether it gets the +1 melee the turn that you deploy the new one. I doubt it does. I imagine it gives +1 to everything and then deploys a grot. But still, I think that is... Gazgul needed something, to be honest, and I think that's really interesting. Kind of encourages you to build more of a board with Gazgul. So, how does that play out then? I suppose like the old fatigue control Gazgul type of thing, it's not really changing that. So yeah, it's kind of really pointing more towards trying to build a horde, which is great. So next up we've got the Death Gun Looter, and that's range attack from 3 to 4. So This card was a 3/3, and now it's basically 3 melee, 3 range with 5 health, all for 4 energy. And I always used to think that's pretty good, but now it's getting +1 to ranged. And the thing about the Death Gun Looter is it can keep growing as well, right? So on to the Death Gun Looter. It is. So whenever another troop dies, you gain +1. So this makes you think, or immediately with like Ghazghkull, for example, you're putting these grots down, that this thing is going to benefit. The only thing is, it has anti-synergy with like Ghazghkull because, and with Mob for that matter, because Mob is about melee attacks, Ghazghkull gives +1 to melee attacks, whereas this guy is getting +1 to range attack. So I'm not really sure whether, I mean, I always used to think this was like a really solid, like decent 4-drop. Maybe being power crept a little bit and doesn't do much. It doesn't do anything on turn that you deploy it, although you can boost your stats on the turn you deploy it. Does a 3/4 make a difference? Potentially. I don't think it will, but potentially if there is a kind of more sort of orc body board building type of build, then potentially Death Gun Looter does fit in there. But I don't think that's going to be too significant. Next up, we got the Shooter Boy. Range increased from 4 to 5. Now this one's bonkers, guys, because look at the Shooter Boy. Already for 3 energy, it's now going to have a 5 range attack. Now that is really interesting, guys, because we don't really have anything in the game, I don't believe, that has that kind of stat line. Now obviously, Shooter Boy can't attack the turn it comes on, although there are ways to make that happen. Which in itself is really powerful, and then the mob ability's always been good on Shooter Boy. So I really like this change. I really think, yeah, I really think this means that Shooter Boy is definitely worth playing and looking at different sort of builds in which this guy could now fit in. Next up, we have the Mega Blaster Deathcopter health increase from 7 to 8. Now, this is the big one. Is it 8-drop or 7-drop? This one. Yeah, so it's a 7-drop and now it's got 8. Unstable is still really bad. The thing about this guy, obviously, Blast 5 is really threatening if it survives. It doesn't have great stats on its attack. Your opponent is mainly going to be forced into attacking the melee, the range, because it is flying. So I think having the 8 health, yeah, I think it makes this quite a nice beginner card at the 7-drop. Do I think this will be in meta decks? I don't, if I'm honest. I don't think it's going to make any difference. And next up, we've got the Hornhelms boys, and the health has increased from 3 to 4 on this. Now, this might be significant, and I'll tell you why. This is a Tide card, and where that is really scary in Orks is when you play the Green Horde, right? You play the Green Horde, your troops cost 2 less this turn, which means that your Hornhelms, that's what they're called, they're essentially costing 1. Yeah, Hornhelms. So they only cost 1 each. And if that means that you're able to put down a 4 health unit, that suddenly makes this thing a lot more survivable. Also, 4 is becoming like quite important, I'm realizing, because a lot of the AoEs now are becoming more standardized, aren't they? So things like the Purifying Flames from Sisters and the new Dark Angel one, they all do 3 damage. So if you're kind of pre-E5 turn troops have 4 health, it's actually quite a big deal. It makes them a lot more survivable. So yeah, again, I could see this going in a Green Horde build. I definitely think there's a Green Horde build that's worth kind of revisiting with some of these changes. Next up, we've got the Stick Bomb Boys. Very, very similar to the one we just said. Stick Bomb Boys are now gone up from 3 to 4 health. So again, it's kind of like leaning into trying to encourage you to play lots of Orks. This is another Tide unit, so we can get 2 of these down. So again, only costing 1 with the Green Horde being played. And this thing can stun. So I'm almost seeing like Green Horde, Crump de Gits, that type of just like big combo where you just go wow and play loads and loads of Orc boys. Yeah, this would fit into, if that archetype works, then this would fit into that now. I think the difference between 3 and 4 health is pretty significant, to be honest. Now you have to remember with both those units that they don't do anything on the turn they come on unless you play something like Crump de Gits. But then this is always about combos, isn't it? So then you sort of say, well, how do you get those how do you get those cards? Obviously, my go-to is always Gruck. I always think Gruck is very good in those types of decks because Gruck can kind of draw. So even though it's Ghazghkull that's kind of received the buff from the Warlords, I actually think that looking at these changes to the troops, I actually think it's Gruck that's probably going to benefit the most, to be honest, right? Because he's the one who's going to be able to actually draw and consistently play the sort of Green Horde-esque combos. Alright, so next up we have got the Boss Knob going up from 3 to 4 range attack. I'm really loving this one, guys, because quite honestly, I really love this card. Like, I think this is a great card, and I think it being 5/4, it has been power crept a little bit in stats, so I can understand it, and I think being 5/4 just makes it a much more consistent, like, decent unit at that rate, at that state of the game. 5 energy, that's really decent stats, good health, and then the ability to generate health often on your Warlord. I think this card's just gone from strength to strength, to be honest. Interesting that it got a buff. Then you got Stomp 'em, costing 2 now instead of 3, and Get 'em Lads costing 4 instead of 5. So Stomp 'em is not a great card. It says give +1 to your units this turn, and trigger their mob abilities. So, you know, you could see this as a cheaper finisher now if it's only costing 2. And if you are going in on a kind of mob type deck, then maybe this is worth it now. The problem is that mob builds just generally aren't that powerful, and I don't think this change is going to really warrant any major changes there. So I don't think that's going to be impactful. However, I do think this next one probably will be impactful. I think Get 'em Lads has always felt like too expensive. 5 energy for +2 to, it's not good. But 4 energy, I actually think that might be a sweet spot here for this. Especially because a lot of the kind of Horde type builds, as we've already kind of alluded to, you're going to be playing troops that cost 3, 4 energy. So they're cheaper troops. So yeah, I can imagine a board state where being able to give +2 to everything. That's your Warlord as well, remember, because it says to your units. Yeah, I could see this. I could see this actually being played in that Horde type build for sure now. So overall, I think there's some. I think the Ghazghkull change is really interesting. I don't know whether it'll be enough to push a Ghazghkull build, because Ghazghkull's always just sort of done well as that kind of like survival late game type of thing. And I don't think this change like benefits that style much. And actually the style of Orks that are going to benefit, I think, are the more kind of Horde based Orks. And maybe Ghazghkull, maybe there's a way of doing it, but the consistency is definitely with Gruck, right? Because Gruck can just draw troops. Remember, when Gruck draws a troop, they get +1 anyway, straight away, and that's a permanent +1. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the Ghazghkull build is going to look like, but it's certainly a really interesting change. Quite a difference in power, that I think, as well. The rest of the changes I think are kind of like so-so. I don't think they're massive, but some of these on like 3 drops go up to 4, and I think the Shooter Boy is a really good change. Yeah, not sure about Stomp 'em, but I think Get 'em Lads will be good. So overall, I think it's more like a Horde-based. It's looking like more of a Horde-based type of Orc build that might be more prolific now, which is good because we're not seeing that in the meta. And yeah, I think that's the main change. Everything else is still there. All the good stuff in Orks hasn't really changed, right? Like in terms of the hard removals and the armors and all, and the flankers and everything. All that stuff is completely changed. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what people come up with, and indeed what I come up with, because like I said, all those other cards are really good. So what do you actually sacrifice? What are you going to put in and get rid of? It's going to be interesting. I do think Gordrag's been hit a little bit, so be interesting to see what happens with Gordrag and his win rate as well. Alright, next up we have the Astra Militarum. Now these are essentially the worst faction in the game at the minute at the meta level. As a beginner faction, ironically they're probably still the best, but at the meta level they are the worst. So they needed some changes, so let's see what happens. Mail on Dross, now regiment draws only stratagems, and duty affects all stratagems in hand instead of just the next one. So the description's changed to regiment, draw a stratagem, duty, lower the cost of stratagems in your hand by 4. Okay. So let's get the Imperial Guard up. So Drost has always been it's kind of legendary that was never played. Costs 8, so he's not a cheap one. Regiment essentially is the same, but the duty is massive here now. I do think that this guy is going to be phenomenal in a Denkler deck, right? Because Denkler can just mean that this can basically mean this guy can trigger duty the turn he comes on, because he is infantry, he's not a vehicle. And then it says stratagems in your hand. Instead of your next stratagem costing 5 or less, it says all stratagems in your hand now cost 4 or less. And that's a permanent reduction. And you could do it again next turn if you have your duty. So I think that there's going to be a build around Mail. I don't know what it is yet, but I think there's going to be a build around him that's going to be quite powerful, because getting -4 to all stratagems in your hand, and that's permanent, is a huge value cheat. It is later in the game, obviously, which is where I kind of rather see these types of abilities, to be honest. So overall, I think this is a good change. Now the Valkyrie is interesting because the Valkyrie is a late game vehicle. It's a 7 energy vehicle. It's a flyer. The melee's gone from 2 to 3. The range has gone from 6 to 7. So a buff +1/+1 in stats. And its description's gone from deal 1 damage to all enemies to deal 2 damage to all enemies. And it says for each one that dies, deploy a shock trooper. Now, obviously, going from 1 to 2 damage is massive in terms of actually killing units to get shock troopers. So that's a huge change that you're going to see in duty. The other thing is, of course, that I just come off here. So 7 drop. Yeah, here we go. So it's now a 3/7, right? Now the health was always good for 7 energy, and remember this is a flyer, so you're going to be forced to attack against the 7 range. The biggest issue is you do nothing again on the turn you come down, and that's still a problem for a 7 drop. However, you would probably run this in the decks that are running the little what's he called? Next to play. Not a 3 drop then. What's he called that gives the... Oh, this one. Vox Operator. God, he's only a 2 drop, isn't it? Yeah, the Vox Operator is the one that basically means that vehicles can use duty because they get flank. I mean, it's going to be really good with this. So, I see there being like a vehicle deck that's based around like kind of the Vox Operators. See that being a bit more viable now. And I do think the Valkyrie will be played. But I do still think that in a lot of decks, you know, you are talking about a big unit that you're playing on 7 that does nothing to the board. That's can be taken out before it ever gets to try the duty. So I think it's a good step in the right direction. I think it's powerful if it survives, but the question is, can it survive? Now, the Master of Ordnance, very simple, guys. All that's happened here is its melee's increased from 2 to 3, meaning that it's got 3 for 3. It's just all 3s. This is the one that essentially triggers 3 damage. Triggers 3 damage. Here he is. For each vehicle in play. Now, I kind of look at it like if you play this with a vehicle and your turn ends, you'll deal 3 damage. And now that it's going to be 3 for 3, deal 3 damage, that's worth it, right? Just getting it off once from one vehicle. The only thing about it, and it reminds me of the the Stern Guard a little bit from the ultramarines is that it is random enemy. So yeah, it's that. If you're doing that on and it's hitting the Warlord, it's like early game, and I mean, obviously it could be pivotal, but I do think the random piece is what lets this down a little bit. If it was like saying random enemy troop, you'd be able to control it a bit more. So I'm not really sure if this will still see play, to be honest. Probably not, except for in that all-out kind of vehicle build that I was talking about earlier. We shall see. Okay, so the at all costs has now lowered from 5 to 4, and it says draw 3 cards if your wall has 10 or less, lower their cost by 4. Now this is one of the changes that I'm super interested in, because this is a really interestingly designed card. The idea is you're losing, it's looking like the game's lost, and then you play this card. It's now only going to cost 4 instead of 5. You're going to draw your 3 cards, and essentially going to now lower the cost by 4 instead of 3. So it's a double buff that this card's getting, and drawing 3 cards at -4, like when you're down to under 10 health and you kind of really need something to swing this game, this might actually be it now, you know, guys. This might actually be a good card now. A double buff is big, and it's actually a and the +1 in lowering cost is really matters too. I think this could be really, really powerful. I think this could be a really good card now. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to trying that. It's actually one of the more exciting changes in the patch, in my opinion. Really interested to try. Press the attack. Now also draws a troop. So basically what this is the 3 energy card that reloads your duty abilities. Okay, so the thing with this card is obviously if you're already winning, you've got multiple things on the board with duty that are spent, then this card's obviously pretty good because they all get to reload. But I always want to think like, what's the worst case scenario? So what I was thinking is with Lord Solar has a duty that basically deals 3 damage. So what you could look at this card as, especially in Solar, is that for 3 energy, it's deal 3 damage, draw a unit. Draw a card, sorry, not a unit. Which is actually pretty good, right? If you think of like a sort of Banshee mask, like deal 3 damage, stun, this will be deal 3 damage, draw a card. And the Imperial Guard actually did need a little bit more ways to draw, so having an extra way to draw is pretty good. But I think in Solar, this is really good. In Orkz, it's like you could use it on her to gain another shock trooper. Yeah, I think this card is going to see playing some specific builds now. Before it just wasn't. Hydra, as basically the melee's increased from 2 to 3, and it now deals 4 damage to a random flyer instead of 3. Again, I don't think it is amazing, but it's good that these cards that weren't seeing any play have been buffed. I still don't think that's going to be enough to see unless we get into a fly heavy meta. Now the Vanquisher, which I always thought was a good card anyway, basically just had its melee attack increased from 4 to 5. So this card is one I played in my Creed kind of tempo build. It's a really nice top end finisher, and of course it has that synergy with the Voxcaster where you can actually flank and immediately deal damage. But I just think buffing that to 5 is really good, like, because it already was super tough to take out, already had great range. So its weakness was melee, and I think now that being 5, it's just so much more respectable at the 8 cost. 4 is. So yeah, I think this is a good card actually, the Vanquisher. I'm pretty happy with that card now. Now the Artillery Strike, which was always a little bit underwhelming, it's gone down from 5 to 4, and I think this is about right, to be honest. This is a good call. And the main reason is it says to 2 random enemies, and that means it can hit the Warlord. Sometimes hitting the Warlord is kind of useless if you're trying to use this in the early game to kind of clear troops. But I think now that it's only 4 instead of 5, I think it feels much better in terms of like the return on the investment. So I'm kind of happy with that change. May well see play, given the fact that we've got things that like Drost, for example. You asking yourself which stratagems do I want to reduce by 4, and so obviously reducing that to only cost, well, to cost 0 would be really, really powerful. At all costs, only costing 1 would be really powerful. I'm really looking forward to trying that out. I think that's going to be kind of it's going to be some pretty sick combos there, to be honest. Right, next up we've got the Regimental Doctrine, which has gone down from 3 to 2. Regimental Doctrine, where are you? Here it is. Heal 2 to all your units and trigger the regiment ability. Yeah, I mean, like, it's a funny one because there aren't a ton of regiment abilities where, like, triggering them that are already on the board, I don't think going to get you a ton of value, if I'm being really, really honest. Swans, King Wands, things like Orkz would be good. This guy would be good, given a +1 permanent +1 reduction. But yeah, just don't think triggering regiments is all that, to be honest. Basilisk, simply, that's your long range tank. It's now gone up from 7 to 8 health, which I think you need that because it is a 7 drop. It costs 7 to cast it. I think having 8 and more chance of actually surviving is good. However, you only have to get attacked. Even if you survive, you only have to get attacked to lose the long range. That's a problem, but the Basilisk also has Blast. Now the Chimera going up from 4 to 5 on the range, that is a big deal. That is a really big deal. Because the Chimera was a good unit anyway. Yeah, the Chimera was a good unit anyway. But going up to 5, just because, like, 4 damage is not a lot for a 6-drop. When you think this is the turn when people are playing, you know, Venom Crawler, for example. The stats just don't cut it. And so I think any help it can get is good. The ability is very good, but the stats just weren't. So yeah, having 5, that's a really good change. And then the other one is the mechanized infantry has gone from 7 to 6. And you lower the cost every time you play a vehicle. So again, mechanized. Yeah. So again, this kind of like all vehicle heavy build, playing the strats that synchronize well, like the mechanized infantry, that could definitely be a thing. I could definitely see that. Now, the Chimera's range attack going from 4 to 5, as we've already said, is really, really good. And then the other one, which is kind of surprised me, is the Shock Trooper's health going from 3 to 4. That surprised me because the Shock Trooper's already a pretty good card, right? Find it. Yeah, here it is. So basically, the health is going to go up to 4, right? And there's a few cards now. We saw it with the Orkz too, where you've got this kind of 4-2 stat line. Having the 4 health on a 3-drop seems to be where they think it's like the sweet spot. Generally speaking, you're really only going to play this guy when you can Shock Trooper the same turn anyway. So yeah. Okay, so overall, looks like they are definitely trying to push the vehicles a little bit more with this build, increase the survivability a little bit of some of the units. I definitely think Frost is a really, really good change. So overall, I'm not sure if this is going to be like a hugely impactful patch, to be honest. But I certainly think that it opens up a few doors to a bit of fun, a bit more testing and some new stuff. And we may well get a really good couple of decks from these. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Thanks for hanging out and supporting the channel. As always, hit that thumbs up below. And yeah, I'll see you guys